Hi, I'm Larry Castle with Ken Brown for episode 41 of That's a Good Question. What challenges do churches face in the next few years? Well, Pastor Ken, we're here on part two of a subject we started last week. You talked about last week the fact that the virus and the election have exposed issues that will carry on for Christians and our churches long after they're passed. Mm-hmm. So it's wise for us to know what they are and consider how to respond to them. And so that's why we have two pastors here sitting and talking about these issues. And there are other matters going on in our culture that are impacting the way that the church operates, and so we should be aware of those as well, the way we interact with one another. And we talked about the fact that Christian people have become angry in many respects and fearful people. And a pastor friend you mentioned tweeted the other day saying that loving other Christians is a distinctive mark of Christians, and cited John 13. Loving enemies is also a distinctive mark of Christians, Matthew 5. And you said that he had also tweeted and asked Christians how much of what you read, listened to, and watched this past week cultivated in your heart, here it is, a seething animosity toward half of the people in our country. And these are really relevant because these are the people we're called to minister to reach. Right. So you pointed out that this fear and this anger is, in fact, despite actually having more media and political power than we've had in the past. And in the last 30 years, we've had more say in the public square than at any other time in the lifetime of anyone who's viewing this. Yeah. And so that's where we left off last week. Let's pick up there.
Well, I mentioned last week that from 1930 to 1994, it was the Democrats who controlled the House of Representatives, amazingly, for 60 out of 64 years. And then I mentioned that from 1932 to 1980, they controlled the Senate for all but 4 of those years, 44 out of 48. But since 1980, I graduated from high school in 1980. Since that time, and since 1994, it's been much more even. For the last 42 years, the Senate's been controlled by Republicans for 22, Democrats for 20. Right now, the Democrats control by a single vote the Senate, and that can easily change in a few years. And then for the House, that was, as I said, controlled by the Democrats for 60 out of 64 years prior to 94. In the 28 years since then, it'll be 28 years next year when the next election happens, it will have been 20 years of Republican control and only 8 for the Democrats. And the advantage the Democrats have right now in the House is just a mere 9 votes, 9 out of 435. We have an election in 2 years, so that could easily change as well.
Well, we talked a little bit about why it is then that so many think that all is lost. I mean, to hear some people talk, you'd think, the ship is all but sunk. And we said it's because they are victims of our own success, really. They now have a conservative media machine that tells them, you turn your talk radio on and you're hearing how bad it is constantly. I mean, it's a constant mantra. Right. And so we then fall into believing that mantra. And that's probably a good place to pick up today because it doesn't appear that this disinformation machine is going to go away.
Yeah. If we could just say, okay, that was like a bad dream, but now we're alert to it. We're not going to let that happen again. We can move on. If we could do that, that would be great. But the truth is, I have no reason to believe that the fake news from the right is going to stop. And in fact, I have fresh reason to believe just the opposite.
Yeah, you said fake news from the right. Yeah. If we watch on television, we are taught that the fake news comes from the liberal media, the mainstream media, the failing New York Times, for instance. So what are you talking about, fake news from the right?
Well, it is true that the news media in general has a very well-earned credibility problem, including more liberal outlets like the New York Times. But I don't care about that nearly as much as I do the false information that comes from conservative media.
If you have a question you'd like us
that.
technical difficulty. Sorry, that was me pressing the wrong button.
Okay, so you weren't cutting me off then. That's not a hook.
Yeah, I need to get one of those hooks. Yeah, that was the ending of our show, coming a little too early. Some of you got excited, and we're still going. So that was supposed to actually be. Every now and then I'll push this little YouTube button, and it tells people to subscribe.
Nice.
Thought I was slick, not looking while I hit the button.
Nice.
See behind the curtain a little.
Okay, well, keep your day job and don't do the no look pass like a point guard.
Yeah, I'll try not to. I was never good at that. Never good at it.
So the reason I'm not terribly concerned about, though, the liberal news media is because, I'll say this yet again, I want to address what our people, our viewers are exposed to.
Yeah.
It does our audience no good to simply point out how bad the other side is, which is what we get all the time, from other outlets. And just this week, we were reminded of just how utterly outlandish and cynical the claims, as this is, I think, a great example of the kind of fake news that people are being fed, how outlandish and cynical the claims of a stolen election and widespread voter fraud were. So here's what happened. One of the prominent members of former President Trump's self-described elite strike force legal team.
Always beware of don't take a name like that for yourself. It's just asking for
that
it.
went down in flames for sure. And that was Rudy Giuliani and Jenna Ellis, and there was a husband and wife team, Joe DeGeneva and his wife Victoria Tensing. They're both attorneys. But perhaps most famously or infamously, Sidney Release the Kraken Powell
I was
is
hoping
back
you were
in
going
the
to use the
news.
nickname. Yeah.
So what is that? What is the Release the Kraken? Well, I'll remind everybody, she's an attorney. Unless and until, honestly, she gets disbarred for these latest shenanigans. I don't know whether that'll happen or not, but I think it's a live possibility. And she came to the attention of conservatives. So stay with me here a little bit while I remind you about this recent history. But she came to the favorable attention of conservatives because she defended a guy named Michael Flynn in court, seeking to get his conviction for lying to the FBI overturned. Now, Flynn was Trump's first national security advisor. He only lasted literally like 3 weeks into Trump's administration in early 2017. Trump fired him because Flynn, lied to the vice president about Flynn's contacts with, guess who? The Russians. Yeah. But he not only lied to the vice president, he lied to the FBI about it as well. And he was prosecuted and found guilty. In fact, he admitted that he did so, that he did it deliberately and knowingly. He did that twice in court. But Attorney Powell took over his defense team kind of midstream. He fired his old defense team. She came on to lead it. And she argued that he had been set up. And the judge, who had heard him swear to his guilt twice before, was not buying any of it. And Flynn and his new attorney, Powell, were going to really be in a world of hurt had not Trump's attorney general stepped in, did something highly unusual. He told the judge that, hey, the U.S. government brought this case against Flynn. The FBI is part of the U.S. government, and the Department of Justice was prosecuting him because he lied to the FBI. But the Attorney General came and said, we are no longer wanting to prosecute him. And while that was winding down, Trump went ahead and pardoned him anyway, just a few months ago. And so that was that. Now, I bring that up because Sidney Powell became a hero to many because of her defense of Flynn. The truth of the matter is, from a legal standpoint, she put him in a very, very bad place that would have, in fact, ended very badly for him had not President Trump and his people intervened for him. She then is asked to be part of that so-called elite strike force team. And she makes some of the most outlandish claims about the 2020 election being stolen. She made those claims in news conferences, on television, especially on Fox News, and to Maria Bartiromo especially, to Lou Dobbs, who used to be, but because of this, as a matter of fact, because of these claims, he's no longer with Fox News. Wow. And she said on those occasions that 2 voting machine companies, Smartmatic and Dominion Voting Systems, had conspired to turn the election for Biden. Now that released the Kraken piece.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and the claims were so bold, you thought no one would say make this up unless they had proof, because this is so bold,
Okay.
right?
Very interesting you would say that, really. That no one would say this unless they have the proof. She must have the proof. This must be the deal.
Yeah.
Because no one, okay? Listen on as we get to what happened this week with regard to what she now says about why she said those things publicly, okay? But let's hold on to what you just said there. So this release the Kraken part related to her is something that she said she was going to do early on. Now, this Kraken is a mythical sea creature, and she was saying she's going to release the full fury of the law in court with overwhelming, incontrovertible evidence to prove that the election was stolen. But for some reason, the Kraken never showed up. As we talked about some time ago, you and I, in case after case in court, Giuliani and friends would not make the claims there in court that they made in front of cameras and in front of microphones. And that's because the claims were not true. And making false statements in front of a camera is one thing. Making them in court is a felony called perjury.
Yeah. Well, and you'd think that making them in front of the camera seems less consequential, but we're finding, I think that
Yes.
maybe not. Yeah. So I recall that, and
Yeah.
it wasn't long ago that we had an insurrection at our nation's capital that's related to all of that. So it seems longer ago than it really was. So let's talk about how she's made news again.
Yeah. So since all of that and the news conferences and all that, since that time, we've had a shift in power, a transition to a new president. We've had an insurrection. Well, those voting machine companies about whom she made those claims of fraud have sued her for defamation. And she filed her reply in federal court this past week.
So this is good. It means that she had the perfect opportunity to finally release the missing Kraken and show the overwhelming evidence of fraud, right?
You would think that the woman who stood before the cameras on November the 19th, just 2 weeks after the election, and she said this with great bravado: "We will not be intimidated. We are going to clean this mess up now. President Trump won by a landslide. We're going to prove it. And we are going to reclaim the United States of America for the people who vote for freedom." So the woman who said that then, and in the interim made claims of vote fraud by Dominion Voting Systems and this other company, Smartmatic, this is what she said this past week in her court filing. This is what she said. Quote, "Anti-Dominion Voting Systems allegations amounted to, quote, hyperbole, common to a political context, and that, quote, reasonable people would not accept such statements as fact." Okay, now you just said you would think if you're going to make claims like that, you've got to have the goods. That's what reasonable people would think.
Yeah.
She's saying in court, no. Reasonable people would not accept such statements as fact. Says that in court this week. That's her defense of her own statements. No one would believe them. Goes on to say that in politics, it's fair game for public statements to be, and here's the wording, vituperative, abusive, and
We have to look that one up, vituperative.
and inexact. So it's therefore okay.
That in itself is a subject that would be worth talking about.
Yeah.
That this is the view of someone speaking for, our side of the political aisle.
That it's okay to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But in public statements, in politics especially, it's okay to do that. And so therefore it's okay to make, again, a quote, wild allegations. That's a quote. Against a participant, an opponent in the political process. Now, one commentator pointed out with regard to all of that, I'm quoting what this commentator said now, setting aside the fact that Dominion was not a candidate or an opponent, but really just a service provider, and thus not usually or properly subject to vituperative hyperbole, what Powell is asserting is manifestly unethical, if not illegal. It's essentially saying that because all politicians lie, it's okay for the politicians' lawyers to exaggerate to the point of lying. So yes, this would have been the time to release the Kraken. But alas, not only was the proof not provided, she said no one should have taken her claims as truth.
Yeah. I mean, it couldn't get any more clear that people were misled, people were lied to, and she's pretty much, that's her defense.
Yeah, that's right. And although she says no reasonable person would believe what she said to be fact, the truth is, as you alluded to earlier, millions, in fact, did believe. Some of them were so convinced that there was a conspiracy to steal the election, they showed up at the Capitol a few weeks later. And we know what happened on January the 6th. Listen, Sidney Powell has some responsibility for that, okay, in a big way. Now, if what Sidney Powell...
It would have been different if before she said all that, she said, now what I'm doing is political hyperbole. Don't take this literally.
Yeah. Oh, no. You heard what I read earlier.
But
She
doesn't
stands
work
up on
then if you
November
do that.
19th. Yeah, exactly. Doesn't get everybody all riled up, you know. So if what Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani and right-wing media claim to be true was in fact true, then I, for one, understand why people would feel some would at least would feel they had no choice but to take their country back because it's being stolen.
Yeah.
And that's what some, in fact, tried to do. But for most, of course, they didn't participate in an insurrection, but still they heard that and they were angered. They felt angry, and many still do, still convinced that the election was stolen, even though those who made these claims publicly refused to make those claims in court.
Yeah, and as you pointed out many times, this is not, tons of extremist people. These are good, otherwise good, reasonable people that thought the same thing I said earlier, and that is, well, nobody would say that if it wasn't true. Nobody would make these huge claims if they couldn't show it.
That's right. That's
must have happened.
The vast majority of people. These are our viewers. These are the people that we pastor. These are the people we love. These are the people that we care about. That's why we're doing this. Listen, forgive the grammar. It ain't because of politics. It's because truth matters. And we need to really pound that home, and we need to understand how we are being pulled away from truth. Sidney Powell, in fact, insults the people that we are saying we love and cherish here. She insults those who believed her as being unreasonable. Because after all, quote, reasonable people would not accept these statements as fact. So if you believe them from Sidney Powell, you're apparently an unreasonable person. Listen,
Gullible.
Friends, gullible.
That's what she's saying. Yeah.
Yes. Listen, Christian people are reasonable people. Our God gave us reason, and we're to exercise it. Let me tell you something that's eminently reasonable for all of us then, friends, to do now. Determine this right now, to never let the voices of falsehood mislead you again. Now, I'm going to be doing a series. This is so important as we discuss this issue of what our church is going to face in the future. This is so important. This idea of disinformation, misinformation, people purposely and knowingly misleading. It's so important that in August at our church, Community Bible Church, Trenton, Michigan, we're going to do a series called The Wisdom Pyramid. And we're going to suggest how we can navigate the terrain of the information and disinformation jungle that we're now all faced with.
So you're saying that this is one of the major challenges that churches face in the next years, because we've not only been inundated with what is now admittedly and clearly false information, but it's not in the past.
No, it's not.
So those who are able to monetize misinformation, so the networks who capitalize on this and capitalize on keeping us afraid and agitated, they're going to keep doing this.
Keep doing it. It's a business model.
Yeah, that's the way you've said it
That's
before.
the way
It's
I've
well
said
said.
it. Yeah, and it's a problem for many reasons, not least because there are, in fact, real issues that we Christians and churches are going to need to deal with in the next few years. But we're not going to be able to do that if we're distracted by our own versions of fake issues. If we allow people to make stuff up and make issues out of things and get us distracted and worried, now how are we going to focus on the real issues? And in fact, there are real issues.
Yeah, and as we bring them up, what credibility do we have to
excellent,
make
exactly
way
right.
with them? Yeah.
Exactly right. Most of our fake news is not as big as stop the steal lie. I mean, because frankly, it's hard to see how much could be bigger than that. I'm not being hyperbolic when I say this. In my own view, I think this thing that we went through the last few months And what people like Sidney Powell did, this may be the most consequential lie I've ever witnessed. I mean, look at the consequences of it.
Yeah.
Look at, for the first time in 200 years, people invading our capital because of this. So very, very consequential. So not much is going to compare to that, but media manipulation in more subtle forms, including from our own chosen sources of media, is in fact very real, and it should be of concern to us. Friends, this is something that we Christians and churches are going to be facing again over the next few years. So here's an example. Many of you are on email or you're on snail mail lists from organizations that feed you stuff designed to get you riled up enough to send money, hopefully,
That's
to
usually
them.
what it is, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So here's an example from a place that, I have high regard for, Hillsdale College. In our very own Michigan here, only about an hour and a half away from us. Hillsdale College, famously conservative, place. And the president of Hillsdale College, Larry Arnn, sends an email this past week. And the subject is this: share your thoughts on big tech. Okay? So I'm just...
Whoop,
Yeah.
Did it again. I'm just trying to switch camera, folks. Sorry about that.
But what I really think's going on here is I think I'm being censored. I think I'm being canceled.
Got me exposed right here live on the broadcast.
It won't work, okay? I'm going to continue on. So Larry Arnn, the president of Hillsdale College, sends one of these kind of typical emails to get, his constituency riled up. And he writes, it's called Share Your Thoughts on Big Tech. That's the subject. And then starts this. It's Dear Friend of the Constitution. Over the past few months, the extremism of the political left's agenda. All right, just stop there. You're already getting riled, right? The extremism of the political left's agenda has become clear through the actions of the mainstream media and big tech companies like Twitter and Amazon. Together, these forces are working to, and then this is all in bold, suppress conservative speech and political activity, just like you're trying to do with me.
I'm seriously, I almost did it again as I switched the camera. Seriously.
If it happens again, I'll know. Okay, that'll confirm it.
Yeah, no, this is seriously though. I get email like this, or it's mostly email now, or mailings like this, and it's in big bold, and then at the bottom there's check boxes for how much I would like to give.
That's exactly what's going on. It's not to say that everything that's above that is untrue,
right? Or that it's wrong to contribute to things that are worthwhile.
Indeed. But just understand that the language is being used to get you riled up. Okay, so this is all done to, all in bold, suppress conservative speech and political activity, denying First Amendment rights to their political opponents, denying access to conservative opinion and important news stories to the American people. And then in bold, once again, we have never seen anything like what we are seeing in America. You've never seen anything like it. That's why I'm asking you to take a Hillsdale College national survey of the threat of big tech. Now just stop and think about that. I've just laid out for you what big tech is.
Yeah. It sounds like it can be a good survey with honest opinions and unbiased feedback.
Now I want to know what you think about big tech. So one guy commented, he said, the folks at Hillsdale College want to know what the mainstream Americans of their mailing list think about the threat of big tech, but not before telling those people at length about the extremism of the leftist big tech agenda. And then he says, very scientific survey that they're running there. Again, Hillsdale College has got a lot to commend it. There's a lot to like about Hillsdale College. There's a lot to like about Larry Arnn. But he's not the only one that does that. Of course they do it on the left. I don't care what the left does. But that's the kind of thing that happens. Let me give another example. About 10 days ago, a very good and intelligent brother sent me a note.
Can I interject a question? Do you think that that's influenced? So, like you said, there's a lot to commend about that college, about this leader, community leader. Do you think that's influenced by, they've hired an agency, and these groups know how to do this stuff?
Okay.
Here's how you work it. I don't know that. I just wonder if you knew that.
I imagine that's true. That Larry Arnn's probably not putting this thing together. Right? Somebody else is doing that and saying, this is how you get people excited. This is how you get the most donations. You put something like that out there.
They're probably right. That is the technique that's most commonly used.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, make it good.
Nevertheless, if we hire somebody and it goes out under our name
Yes.
and our institution's name, we're still responsible
Yeah,
for
you
it.
delegated, that's it, though.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
But here's another example of it. Is about 10 days ago, a very good, intelligent brother sent me a note saying that he had just seen a headline that the Democrats are looking to, he said, pack the Supreme Court. And he asked me the question, do they really think they're going to be able to get away with this? Now, I remember during the campaign, there was some talk about that, and if Biden gets elected, that's what they're going to try to do. But I
Yeah,
really
it seemed like some of the Democrats were using language that left it open.
Yeah.
But that might have also been bait for the people who would
Their
vote for
side.
them who want it.
On their side, get them riled
Doing
up.
the same thing. Yeah.
Same thing, exactly right. But I hadn't heard anything new about it, in the last 10 days. And so I asked the brother, where'd you see that headline? And he forwarded me an email from another group that does, I think, some good work called the American Center for Law and Justice. That's Jay Sekulow. Yeah, many of our viewers probably know who Jay Sekulow is. But a couple of things stood out to me immediately when I looked at that email. One is there was nothing in the email that indicated that, in fact, there was a real imminent threat to the court, number one. And two, it was a relatively short fundraising email. And these are always designed to alarm and create fear so that you act. And so here's what it said. It said, President Biden and the radical left are advancing a political ploy to pack the Supreme Court. President Biden has just established a commission to reform the Supreme Court and the federal judiciary, and he's packed it with radical. Now, let me just stop there. Now, this is about packing the Supreme Court. Notice the language. Biden's established a commission, and what has he packed? The commission.
I'm glad you pointed that out because I got my wallet out. I'm ready to send my money in.
He's packed the commission with radical left ideologues bent on packing the courts. He actually called our judicial system and the Supreme Court, quote, out of whack. We're taking action. Okay, wow. What action are they taking? It then says this, there's a button that says sign our petition. Sign our petition. You and I can do that, right? We can put a petition together for anything we want. So what are they going to do with that petition? What effect is that going to have? Didn't say. The truth is they're not taking any meaningful action. Here's why. Because there's nothing to do at this point. And I don't think there ever is going to be anything to do with that particular issue, not in the foreseeable future. I pointed out to this brother, a commission can't do a single thing. With regard to our courts and how many seats are on it, according to our Constitution, Congress itself sets how many seats are on the Supreme Court. Given how closely divided the House and the Senate are, as I mentioned earlier, let me prophesy this. There will be no change to the number of seats on the Supreme Court during the Biden administration, and I frankly don't even see it happening in my lifetime. But it's one of a myriad of issues that alarm people and get them riled and motivated.
Yeah, I just looked very carefully before I pressed the button to change cameras. So we have this ongoing misinformation then in our media sources, and we on the right are very sensitive to how that happens on the left, but we can turn a blind eye to it on the right, and we're saying don't do that. Yes. So this will continue to be a challenge for Christians, for churches in the next few years. Yeah. What else can we face that we can talk about?
Well, friends, we have got to have clear heads. And that's why we're saying let's filter out the disinformation, the fear-mongering, because there are things that are going to come. There are always trials. There are always opposition that faces God's people. And so we need to have clear heads as to how we respond to that, how we deal with that. There are things about which we need to be concerned, and it's going to require real intellectual discipline to deal with those. So here's a few. Religious freedom is being tested both on the individual and the church level, especially as it relates to what's increasingly now the requirement to recognize LGBTQ rights. And I say on the individual and church level. On the individual level, I am concerned that Christian business owners are going to be forced to behave in ways that violate their consciences. You know, most of us know a few years ago about the baker, I think it was in Colorado,
Yeah.
who was forced to, you know, make a wedding cake, you know, for a gay couple. He went to court, and he's had all kinds of harassment in the years since that. But more recently, we had right here in Southeast Michigan, we had a funeral director whose family for decades, generations, had owned a number of funeral homes right here. It's the RG and GR Harris funeral home chain. And the situation was that he had at one of his locations a longtime employee who was a greeter, a host at the funeral home, who this man decided to become transgender and become a woman. Well, the funeral director was faced with, is this the image that is going to be at the front, our front door that we want to present? And plus, he happened to be the owner, was a Christian. And so he had troubles with that as well. This went to court, went all the way up the court system, excuse me, and all the way to the Supreme Court. And on the basis of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, on the basis of that, the conservative Supreme Court that we have right now ruled in favor of the transgender woman now. And did so, interestingly, because the language of the Civil Rights Act has in it that discrimination shall not occur on the basis, and lists a number of things, but then one of those is on the basis of sex. That's what it says, on the basis of sex. And it was because of that the justice who wrote the majority opinion, Neil Gorsuch, who was appointed by President Trump, he wrote in favor of the transgender woman because of that, on the basis of sex. And he said that, look, sex means biological sex. And if this person was a different biological sex, you wouldn't have a problem with her having this position. I mean, that was the reasoning. And therefore, you're discriminating in violation of the Civil Rights Act. That's the way it was reasoned. Now, it's interesting because I remember in the late 70s when I was in high school, the early 80s, the Equal Rights Amendment. Some of our viewers may remember that, but it was to be an amendment to our Constitution. And some of you know that one of the ways to amend the Constitution is to have Congress pass the amendment, but then have it ratified by 3/4 of the states. That means 38 states have to ratify it. The Equal Rights Amendment was introduced to the states in the early 70s. Within 2 years, 35 states had ratified, including Michigan. And then for 10 more years, they couldn't get the additional 3 states. And it didn't pass. And it's not law right now. I bring it up, though, for this reason, that the ERA, Equal Rights Amendment, had this virtually the same language of the Civil Rights Act. Instead of on the basis of sex, it said on account of sex. And I remember conservatives making the argument way back then. Phyllis Schlafly, some of you may know that name. She's now deceased, just as of a few years ago. But she was head of a conservative women's group called Eagle Forum. And she was an attorney, but also had been a housewife for most of her life, but very articulate, Phyllis Schlafly. And she led the opposition to the ERA. But one of the arguments she made, and it had great effect, was that, hey, this language of on account of sex is going to be used to help the homosexual agenda. Now, this is in the 70s, when there wasn't
Is that
much of a...
because it didn't say on account of gender or on account of...
Just because if someone is homosexual and you've got a man who has relations then by definition with a man, and you say, well, there are certain things you're not entitled to do because of that, you're also saying if that was a woman having relations with a man,
I see.
so it's on account of my sex. Okay,
I see.
That's what they're and I thought, wow, really, would that happen? And back then, there wasn't much of a homosexual agenda to speak of, but she was prescient with regard to that, because that's exactly how the reasoning went for this. So here you have a conservative Supreme Court that is not conservative politically, contrary to what their detractors on the liberal side say. No, it's conservative in the approach to the Constitution. And that approach, though, can lead to these kinds of outcomes. And here just a year ago did. So now what's going to happen going forward? You know, you have, maybe I should wait till next week. Should I? What do you think here? Yeah, I probably
Yeah,
should.
you know what? We're at 35 minutes or so.
Is that all? That's 35?
Yeah. So,
Oh,
but
okay.
but who knows
you're
how
having
long
fun.
this will
Okay.
take?
All right,
Yeah. So I
fine.
think it's good. That is a good place to cut it off. So.
All right.
There is a lot to talk about with this topic, so we'll pick that up then next week. So part 2 this week, part 3 next week, and just want to say, as always, thanks for watching each week, and thanks for the feedback that you give. We have lots of folks telling us that they appreciate these episodes, and it's very helpful to think through these things. So if you don't already, why don't you subscribe to our YouTube page here? You can do that wherever you're watching. Hit the notification bell so you'll know when new episodes come out. But they come out every Saturday at 2 p.m. And I think that's it for this week. So we'll see you next time. If you have a question you'd like us to consider, you can send that in to our email address, info@cbctrenton.com, or text it to us at 97000.